Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. Varesa has popped out of nowhere to become our newest playable 5-star character in Genshin Impact. In this video, we'll go over everything you need to know to get the most out of your Varesa in today's ultimate guide video. We've got a lot of stuff to cover, so let's not bother with the usual wisecracks, except for this one, and maybe just one more later. Comment down below if you catch it. As usual, we'll go over her entire kit, artifacts and stats, weapons, constellations and investment priority, her best teams, and finally my opinion on Varesa. This video was filmed on the Creator Experience server, and as with any Creator Experience server video, things are subject to change on release, so if there are any notable changes, please check the comments down below. Varesa's kit is actually quite complicated and very confusing on paper, but quite simple in practice. Her playstyle revolves around looping through a series of inputs to output a lot of plunge damage. I went back and forth on how to try to explain her kit, and I've decided to go with only presenting the most relevant information because otherwise it's information overloaded. Now we'll actually start with the wise philosopher because this is all you honestly need to know to actually use her. As the wise philosopher once said, ECAP, ECAP-Q. Repeat. I'll be calling the first part of the combo ECAP and the second part of the combo ECAP-Q. And as such, the full combo is known as ECAP ECAP Q. Now what exactly is going on here? Let's first understand all the pieces to this puzzle. E is her elemental skill, which has 2 charges, which when tapped rushes her forward and generates 20 Night Soul points. And it generates, I believe, 2 or 3 electro particles, although someone else will confirm exactly how many particles are generated. CA is for her charged attack, which bounces her up in the air high enough to perform a plunge attack. And of course her plunge attack is simply a plunge attack, but it does generate 25 Night Soul points when it hits the enemy. And her elemental burst, while it does have 2 variations, we'll mainly be talking about the mini Q, which costs 30 out of her 70 max energy. Now that we know the individual pieces, let's take a look at the full combo. Starting with the first ECAP. We first start with E, which uses her elemental skill to give you 20 Night Soul points, and it also gives her the follow-up strike effect, which basically just allows her to use a much faster version of her charged attack by simply tapping the basic attack button. Then, Varesa's plunge attack generates 25 Night Soul points, thus putting Varesa at her maximum 40 Night Soul points. And when she fills up her Night Soul points with the plunge attack specifically, she enters into her Fiery Passion state, which is indicated by her shiny purple Night Soul bar. In Fiery Passion state, almost all of Varesa's multipliers are improved. Also, when she enters Fiery Rebate state, she gets what I'm going to be calling a rebate skill. So now we've made it to the second part of the combo, ECAP Q. We'll use the rebate skill, which doesn't consume any charges, doesn't generate any particles, lasts for the duration of Fiery Passion, and allows you to quickly gain a follow-up strike to perform a charged attack. Then you can perform a plunge attack, and if you perform a plunge attack while in Fiery Passion, now you'll consume all your Night Soul points and you'll briefly gain Apex Drive. Apex Drive is what allows us to use her mini burst, hence we can end this combo with her mini Q. Now everything is back at square one, so we can just repeat this combo. Okay, now there are a few additional details about her kit worth knowing, even if they don't change how you use her. First, all of her attacks in Fiery Passion have higher multipliers, so more of her damage is allocated to the ECAP Q part of her combo. Next, her first combat passive increases the next instance of plunge attack damage's multiplier by 60% and 150% if she's not in or if she's in Fiery Passion respectively. This basically just encourages you to use your skill before you use a plunge attack. Then we have her Night Soul Burst mechanic, which as a refresher is the full screen flash whose frequency depends on how many Natlan characters you have in your party. Each time Night Soul Burst is triggered, she gains 35% attack for 12 seconds, stacking up to 2 times. So with 3 Natlan characters, you'll only have a brief window, roughly 2 to 3 seconds, where you'll have 2 stacks. But with Xianyun, you will be able to maintain both stacks on her for much longer, which is nice. So with all that, we have enough knowledge to take a look at this flowchart to help you understand what is going on. Because frankly, while using her is simple, what's actually going on is quite confusing. confusing because of all her different states. Knowing the individual parts of the combo from this flowchart will help you in situations where your standard combo flow is broken, but otherwise this should be good enough to get you started. This knowledge isn't necessary to utilize her competently, all you really need to know is ECAP, Q. But this stuff is good to know for if there are some things you eventually want to min-max or experiment with. Anyway, if you're confused about what's going on after using her for a bit, I recommend coming back to this chart, which might hopefully doesn't have any errors, and to hopefully help you see what's going on and why. Anyway, next let's talk about her rotation and some tricks. Each ECAP Q combo takes around 4 to 5 seconds. Generally speaking, you can do this full combo 2 to 3 times per rotation, or 2.5 times. You can actually swap Varesa off after the first ECAP part of the combo. For 15 seconds, even when she's off field, she will retain Fiery Passion state, and thus she'll retain her rebate skill. Why is this useful? Well, as such, for the first rotation, Varesa can do ECAP Q, ECAP Q, ECAP, which takes around 12-ish or so seconds. Then, since swapping off of her ECAP doesn't lose your Fiery Passion, you have 15 seconds now of Fiery Passion duration to do all your support stuff, then swap Varesa back on and you'll be able to start the combo at ECAP Q, ECAP. And as such, your second combo will be ECAP Q, ECAP, ECAP Q, ECAP, ECAP Q. And now we're back at square one, where we can repeat the first rotation. Another very nice benefit about being able to swap off after ECAP is that it's great for reapplying shorter buffs like Viridescent Veneer, or Sara's short 6-second buff, or even Overloaded, or just to generate some particles for your team. Now the next tip I have is that generally speaking, you'll want to perform high plunge attacks instead of low plunge attacks, so a very slight delay after using charge attack will accomplish this. Lastly, you can weave in a normal attack before each E to squeeze out some extra value from characters like Xingqiu, Yelan, Fischl, or Beidou if you're using them, like in some wacky hodgepodge Imaginarium Theater team. There's also a trick with the Obsidian Codex, which I'll talk about in the artifact section. Okay, and one last trick for real this time is that Varesa actually has a somewhat secret burst multiplier. If you use her big Q right after entering Fiery Passion state, but before you gain Apex Drive, you'll actually be able to perform this higher multiplier big Q. Okay, I keep finding more tricks for her, so this is hopefully the last one, I promise. But in Natlan areas, you might find yourself accidentally activating Night Soul Transmission, where you swap to Varesa and she'll just bolt away from your enemies. To avoid this, don't press any direction button while swapping to Varesa, and she won't run off like a maniac. And finally, for her talent priority, level her basics and then her burst, followed by her skill. Okay, we've made it to the math section of this video. Varesa is actually a bit of an interesting character when it comes to her artifact set options. She has two main sets to consider, the Long Knight's Oath and the Obsidian Codex. The Long Knight's Oath's 2-piece set bonus provides 25% plunge damage bonus, and the 4-piece set bonus essentially just provides Varesa with 75% plunge attack damage, making it provide a whopping 100% plunge damage total. Also, it has a neat little visual indicator of how many stacks are active near her HP bar on the right side. Generally speaking, this is her best in slot set, especially without a bunch of external buffs. The next artifact set to talk about is the Obsidian Codex, which is also a great set for Varesa, but mainly in a full team scenario. This thing provides 15% bonus damage during Night Soul state, which actually, Varesa isn't in Night Soul state for a non-negligible portion, but more importantly, it provides 40% crit rate if you consume any Night Soul points for 6 seconds. If you actually very briefly hold E, Varesa will consume a couple of Night Soul points, activating the Obsidian Codex's crit rate buff, and thus practically having 100% uptime except for the very first hit from that E. This tech is very useful for getting the most out of your Obsidian Codex. Although Varesa, being the bull that she is, you might lose control of her. Regardless, her solo damage with the Obsidian Codex is actually pretty poor in comparison to the Long Knight's Oath at only 87%. But what about in a full team setting? Because team buffs generally heavily saturate the attack and bonus damage multipliers, in our standard overloaded team with Constellation 6 Chevreuse and Constellation 6 Iansan, the Obsidian Codex is at around 98% of the Long Knight's Oath. Granted, this is with Constellation 6 Chevreuse and Constellation 6 Iansan, which provide a lot of bonus damage, as well as Mavuika's bonus damage damage buff, so if you're not using a team with a lot of bonus damage buffs, then the Long Night's Oath will be more ahead than this. But still, given the fact that the Obsidian Codex is at 98% of the Long Night's Oath in this team, if you already have a great Obsidian Codex set and don't plan to pull for whoever is going to use that other hyper-specific cryo set, then it's totally understandable to not bother farming the new set for Varesa. It's also worth mentioning that Varesa's solo damage with the Long Night's Oath is important to consider for content like Imaginarium Theater and the Overworld, as you generally don't have her optimal team for this type of content. And Varesa's raw damage is honestly high enough for her to carry that type of content, so in my opinion, her solo damage output is actually relevant to consider and another reason to consider farming the Long Night's Oath. Now personally, I do plan on farming the Long Night's Oath, but it's also because I'll want that other set for the upcoming character who will utilize that, so do take that into consideration. Anyway, we also have the Marichasi Hunter, which definitely falls behind and also requires Furina, but is perfectly usable if you have a really good set and, well, plan to use it with Furina. Oh right, one more thing about the Obsidian Codex and the Marichasi Hunter, because Varesa has crit rate as an ascension stat, this means that she can easily over crit, especially with crit rate weapons, so do keep an eye on your crit rate with these sets. As for main stats, is the usual attack percent timepiece, electro damage goblet, and crit circlet. Whatever circlet helps you balance your crit ratio to the usual 1 to 2 crit rate to crit damage ratio. For the goblets, an attack percent goblet is worse in almost every situation, and you often run Varesa with attack buffers as well, but if it has around like 3 or 4 better substats than your electro goblet, you can consider it. Okay, now let's talk about energy recharge. Energy recharge is a subject that I always find difficult because it's always a moving target, highly dependent on her teammates and the fight. But generally speaking, if you average 2 to 3 mini bursts per rotation, and with 1 to 2 Favoni's users on her team along with Iansan, I recommend 120 to 130% energy recharge. For most overloaded teams, you can even sometimes get away with as little as 10%, but for more aggressive 2.5 mini burst rotations on low energy Xianyun teams, it can get as high as 155%. But personally, I don't think sacrificing that much damage to maintain an extra mini burst every other rotation is worth it, so I personally just recommend around 120 to 130% to cover most scenarios. As for substats, it's the usual get as many crit subs as possible, as well as some energy recharge, and then of course attack percent is aight, and finally flat attack isn't useless. We've made it to Varesa's catalysts or weapons, starting with her signature catalyst, the Vivid Notions. This thing is clearly just designed for her, and from my personal testing, both of these stacks apply to all her plunges, which ends up just being another 68% crit damage to her plunge attacks. Hopefully I didn't mess up the math somewhere along the way, but either way, needless to say, this is overall by far her best option. In terms of average damage performance, it's on average around 25 to 30% better than the Widsith, although only a few percentage points ahead for when the Widsith has the proper 1 or 2 note buffs. Speaking of the Widsith, overall it's the most accessible, free-to-play friendly option for Varesa. We all know this thing has its issues with uptime every other rotation and providing a massive attack buff, elemental damage buff, or elemental mastery buff 1/3 of the time. Sadly, Varesa doesn't rely on reaction, so the 3-note elemental mastery buff just isn't very good on her. As such, the Widsith's average damage is very poor, and only having one of its buffs up every other rotation. But fortunately, you are able to quickly reset top half Abyss Chambers to fish for the proper buff, but alas, that is very annoying to do. Still, the Widsith at its peak performance is at around 94% of her signature weapon in a full team, which is pretty good for when you do get the right buff. Now as for her other weapon options, she's got a lot to choose from, with probably overall her next best option being the Crane's Echoing Call, as it provides some energy for her and some plunge damage bonus. Then I'd say the Lost Prayer to the Sacred Winds is a reasonable choice, especially for the overworld, as that movement speed is nice to have. Finally, we have all the other random 5-star stat sticks, including Cashflow Supervision, Kagra's Verity, Skyward Atlas, Surf's Up, Tome of the Eternal Flow, all which perform pretty similarly to the average performance of the Widsith. As for her best craftable option worth considering, if you don't have the Widsith with some refinements, I'd have to say the Flowing Purity is overall her best option. Since you generally run Varesa with healers and sometimes multiple healers, and no, Iansan's healing is not enough for this weapon, with other healers like Chevreuse or Xianyun, you can fulfill this weapon's passive. As for the other options, well, they're on this list if you want to take a look at it. Alright, we've reached the Constellations and investment priority for Varesa, and this section always has the worst retention, so here is a GIF of Varesa in their natural habitat. But after actually activating this and not just theory crafting, here I am re-recording this section with some changed opinions and star ratings. So first of all, let's talk about her signature weapon, which when you upgrade from the, for example, R5 Widsith, the average damage output is going to be about a 30% gain. But of course, this could be as low as, for example, 10 to 15% or even 5% if you're talking about one single rotation versus 2 rotations or even 3 rotations where the Widsith can catch up a bit, but that is heavy RNG. I personally don't like it, so I take the average of the Widsith when it comes to the Widsith's performance. So yeah, big upgrade in terms of her damage, and it's one of the biggest upgrades for her damage is going for her signature 1 refinement weapon. So if all you care about is her damage, then signature weapon it is. But her Constellation 1 is actually really crazy, and for one, it increases her basic plunge damage as well as her Q's plunge damage, and that leads to a modest 11% increase to her overall damage output. But what makes her Constellation 1 actually really crazy is not the damage that it provides, it is the exploration quality of life that it provides, and this one feels way bigger than even the other characters that we've had so far. Basically, with that 30% less stamina consumption, she can run for a very long time, or she can sprint, and Varesa's max speeds are absolutely insane. So being able to go max speed for much longer leads her to cross this bridge faster than even a Constellation 0 Varesa. Because the current banner is also so good to actually pull on because of the 4 stars with Iansan as well as Chevreuse, I would actually recommend this current banner because you'll be getting Constellations on Iansan and potentially Chevreuse if you don't already have her at Constellation 6, and those are going to lead to big damage gains for Varesa. Versus Constellation 2, as we move down though, you know, less people care about these, so I'm going to be quick about them. Versus Constellation 2 basically allows her to use a mini Q after every single plunge and not just every other plunge. Versus Constellation 3 adds 3 levels to her burst level. Versus Constellation 4 is pretty crazy because it adds 100 bonus damage to her mini Q. It also lets you do a nifty different rotation where you use your Q first to get the first plunge to be a pretty big plunge, which I'll showcase in a little bit. And then her Constellation 5 adds 3 levels to her normal attacks, which does increase her damage by a bit. And then finally we have Constellation 6, which provides a ton of crit value as well as providing basically infinite energy. Every time she does her E and then her thingy, she'll gain 30 energy, allowing her to actually gain more energy than she spends, which is kind of funny. This also allows you to use a Q at the very beginning of the rotation or to get that first part of the C4 buff. As we can see with this first initial plunge attack doing, I think, like over 1 million damage with a full C6 R5 team. Just kind of funny to see. Up next are Varesa's teams. Varesa is actually quite a flexible character thanks to her high multipliers and lack of dependency on reactions. As such, she can rely on generic damage buffs and is thus very flexible in terms of team building. One of her better teams will be an Overloaded team. You will likely use Varesa, Iansan, and Chevreuse, with the 4th slot being more flexible. You can use Bennett for the biggest initial numbers, but remember you can also swap Bennett on for 1 second mid-rotation to reapply Overloaded, although you also deal with Circle Impact and slightly inconvenient impact. You can use Mavuika for the highest Overloaded team DPS, although Mavuika is generally better used as a main DPS, but you can still use her. You can use Pyro Traveler or Dea for off-field pyro application as well. The next team archetype is where you pretty much just mix and match any of the meta buffers, including but not limited to Iansan, Bennett, Xianyun, Furina, Xianyun, Kazuha, and Sara. Let's start with the team that many are saying is her best team, although I gotta be completely honest, while using it, I personally wasn't the biggest fan. This team is Varesa, Iansan, Xianyun, and Furina. The issue with this team is because Electro Charged quickly removes Electro, activating Cinder City on Iansan, as well as an Electro Swirl on Xianyun is very difficult. And in the time that I spent with this team, I couldn't find a consistent setup for that. Of course, you can always just say screw you to the Viridescent Veneer and run something else on Xianyun, but the Viridescent Veneer is just such a good set, and also this team's only source of resistance shred, that I find it hard to justify dropping it. Regardless, even without Viridescent Veneer shred, this is still a very powerful team. A variant I personally prefer is actually the Zookeeper team, with Iansan taking a cow, a bird, and an ocelot. You have to run the Cinder City on Xianyun and either the Noblesse or honestly, God forbid, the Archaic Petra on Iansan. Anyway, this team is much more consistent to set up if you have Noblesse on Iansan, and as such is much easier to use. You can also squeeze in Sara in some of these comps, but I did find her unwieldy to use, needing to swap her on in between combos, do an aim shot, E or Q, and with how much Varesa moves, I'm not even 100% sure if she always grabs Sara's buffs. But still, if you're fine with this, Sara should be a viable teammate as well. The following teams, while probably not as good, are still very powerful. You can run Varesa with characters like Dendro plus Fischl. While Aggravate is certainly not optimal, it's likely good enough for the hodgepodge of misfits that you'll likely have in Imaginarium Theater. Similarly, you can run a Quick Bloom team with Furina Baizhu, or even a team with Kazuha for his elemental damage bonus, as well as grouping and Viridescent Veneer shred, or you can run Double Geo. Frankly, you can pretty much just run whatever two characters with Iansan and Varesa that work best for the situation, like if you need to break various elemental shields or countering specific enemy mechanics. Finally, if you're a returning player, there's the 1.0 team with Varesa, Iansan, Bennett, and Sucrose. While you do deal with circle impact because of Bennett, Varesa will still output a ton of damage. And if you don't get Iansan while pulling for Varesa, type F in the chat, you can somewhat replace her in most of the above teams with any of these following characters, but Iansan is clearly one of Varesa's best teammates, so I do hope you get her. Alright, I've got a few quick showcases for you guys, and we're going to start off with this one, or I guess with this build where she's using the Woodsith, and her artifacts are actually quite good, definitely above average, but her talents are indeed just at 9, 9, and 9, so it kind of makes up for the missing talent levels, especially for the normal as well as bursts, which you definitely want to crown with Varesa. And we also have some showcases with her signature weapon, the Vivid, whatever, I think Memories or something. And then we have Bennett here as well, the standard builds, Noblesse Bennett, Cinder City, Iansan, as well as I had Noblesse on Chevreuse for one of the teams, as well as Noblesse on Iansan for one of the teams. We'll get there, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But starting off with this free-to-play friendly $2 stake team, Chevreuse is at Constellation 6, but everyone else is at Constellation... Okay, Bennett is also at Constellation 5 or 6, and Iansan and Varesa are both at Constellation 0. And we are starting off with the Woodsith. Now the first rotation goes pretty well because we did get the attack buff, and I managed to swap Bennett on field in order to reapply Overloaded. Now one thing about this team and using them in Natlan is that it can be pretty annoying with the, the Night Soul transmissions, because Varesa will just run off into the sunset way too far away from the enemy, and that is very unfortunate when that happens. So you have to do your best to not press any direction keys or dash shortly before Varesa's turn. So in this case, you can see I don't move Bennett. I'm not touching the direction keys at all in order to avoid that. So anyway, this team actually did pretty well because, and this is the issue with the Gopher run. It has 5 million hit points, which makes it a great punching bag, but we actually got an instance of fall damage with this team, as well as 2 stuns against the Gopher, with each stun dealing a decent chunk of its health. I believe around 10% of its health or so. I don't know exactly how much, but you can definitely see its HP chunk. So anyway, this next team is the Let the Show Not Swirl, and this was a big issue I had with Xianyun and Furina, is that because of electro charged and essentially, you know, slightly, I'm not sure how much RNG goes into the animals attack timing. They seem to be pretty consistent, but either way, I actually didn't get the swirl on either the first or the second rotation. You can see there that both Hydro and Electro fell off of the Gopher before I managed to hit it with Xianyun's E. So one remedy for this is to actually use, which I realized into the third rotation for this team, is to actually use Xianyun's basic attack 1 in order to more consistently get the swirl. And depending on your ping as well as many other factors and just RNG with Electro charged, you may or may not get that swirl, and even then, swirl uptime isn't for the full rotation unless you swap Xianyun back on and get kind of lucky with the timing there of the electro application. So yeah, this is the main reason why I personally don't like this team as much, because of the inconsistency, and that's one of the big reasons why I don't like the Widsith as well. I'm a person that does value consistency, because these days I can only really reset these runs so many times with covering so many games as well as just life and yada yada. I just don't have the same time I used to at the beginning when I covered Genshin, when I could just reset Abyss over and over and reset runs and whatever. So yeah, the issue with the swirl team with Furina Xianyun is just consistency. But this next team, I keep yapping about the previous team, but the next team is a bad habit of mine with these showcases. But hey, the show must go on. But this next team, the Wagyu steak team, we kind of already covered it. So we can see there that I'm way far away from it somehow. Kind of messed up this run. I think this, all of these runs can definitely be massively improved, because these times are completely meaningless. I did not do enough resets for each team to really have a meaningful clear time, but you guys can at least get some very rough idea of, hey, if I win to lose spends 2 runs per team, what kind of clear times are we seeing from him, with obviously very imperfect runs. Tons of time to improve. But anyway, you can see there that with Varesa, I just ran off into the sunset there, and despite that, this team still ended up being, well, spoilers, I guess, the fastest clear time out of the bunch. But next we have the Zookeeper team, where it's Iansan plus 3 animals. Varesa is a cow, Xianyun is a bird, and Xianyun is an ocelot. So yes, we have 3 different animals here, and this team also feels pretty good to run in terms of consistency and smoothness, but it definitely, I would say, has the lowest damage ceiling potential out of the 3 teams in terms of overall team DPS potential, because yeah, right now here, the Cinder City overlap with Iansan, so Iansan is actually running the Noblesse Oblige for this team, and that's one of the weaknesses of this team, is that you have that overlap where, that's one of the, yeah, I mean, not much else to say about it. But yeah, so overall, in terms of all these teams and their clear times, we can see here, I'm gonna have to drag the chart a bit while I'm recording. You guys won't see this in the final edit, but anyway, we can see here that both the Zookeeper team as well as the $2 stake team got 2 stuns on the Gopher, and they also had very similar clear times. And had the Let the Show Not Swirl with the Furina team gotten 2 stuns, or heck, even with the if we managed to swirl Electro on every rotation, its clear time likely would have been competitive to the Wagyu steak team. But yeah, so that's just kind of, my very anecdotal runs, as well as a quick showcase of these teams with Varesa. So yeah, despite how complicated her kit might seem on paper, she ends up being an easy to use character. Overall, Varesa is an above average plunge DPS character, and importantly, she's a very flexible DPS character, usable in so many different team archetypes. And the fact that Iansan is also on her banner makes this a pretty solid banner overall. So congrats if you do manage to get Varesa while polling for Iansan. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Moo to Lose, signing out.